So you want to get into drawing. Having access to a virtually infinite amount of the best examples of what we would like to achieve is undoubtedly a good thing. However, surfing through endless lists of hand-picked works of perfection, where everyone seems to be a super artist, might be a bit discouraging, especially when we aren't sure where even to begin. And if it all feels like a dark maze to you, then let me provide you with a plan. Let's go together through 3 joyful and easily comprehensible steps to truly enhance your drawing skills. So the first step is mastering primitives and their progressions. The most fundamental element in drawing is a simple straight line. Let's do exactly that. There is no hidden ancient technique here, and you certainly don't need to meditate for 25 years on top of a mountain to understand how to draw a straight line. But there are a couple of things to point out. Find an intuitively comfortable position at your desk and start drawing a line. You can try pivoting your elbow or allow it to move freely while gently touching the paper or the surface you are working with the edge of your palm. It all depends on the length and angle of the line you want to draw, which is why there is no one recipe for this. Your wrist, on the other hand, should always be locked. This way we have the most control, with the only exception when we draw really short lines. These can be pulled from the wrist. And there isn't much more to it than that. A much more interesting aspect about this exercise is what kind of benefit we can extract from it. Let me explain. So it all starts with our brain, which, among other things, serves as a storage place and a signal processing hub for all the communications within our bodies, as well as the signals we receive from the outside world. This communication happens with the help of nerve cells, or neurons, that connect all parts of our body in a huge network. It's like the wiring in your car, but a little more intricate, and in the image it appears to be blue. Anyway, right out of the factory, most of us have default settings that are good enough for the majority of people in most situations. However, when we systematically engage in activities that challenge our abilities in one way or another, that neural network adapts. Under pressure, it can adjust its bandwidth, speed, and ping to become an enhanced version of itself. To be more specific, for example, if we are into music creation, our sense of pitch will improve. When we begin lifting weights, we make a huge jump in strength within the first couple of months, not because our muscles have become stronger, but due to the improved neurological connection between the muscles and the brain. Similarly, as we start drawing, we develop our fine motor skills. And this is precisely what we need and why we practice these lines and other primitives, so that our hands can translate our intentions onto paper as accurately as possible. Right, so one important thing for exercises like this one. Notice how instead of just drawing parallel lines all around, I'm kind of creating these bunches of lines in all directions, creating this ornament. This automatically forces us to draw lines at different angles and lengths. That keeps our brain entertained, and we can keep doing this for longer. And in the end, instead of just boring parallel lines, we have something that resembles a pattern. It looks like we've created something, and it keeps us motivated. The logical evolution of a line are squares and rectangles. The challenges here are to be able to draw lines that are at 90-degree angles to each other. And if it's a square, all 4 sides have to be of the same length. If it's just a rectangle, then the opposing sides have to be of the equal length. I am mixing squares and rectangles, creating this mosaic for the same reason as with the lines, so that in the end we have something visually interesting, not just rows of boxes. Same goes for the triangles. Just draw various kinds of triangles without overthinking the process. By far the most challenging primitive among others is the circle. It's a continuous curve that should be drawn in one motion. My wrist is locked and the circular movement is mainly created by my arm and shoulder. Same as with the lines, squares and triangles, I let a random pattern appear. I want my body to get used to those movements. These types of exercises are meant to be conquered by sheer volumes, and if we start overthinking simple things, we'll get exhausted very soon. Start with the size of a circle you feel most comfortable with, and from there just draw circles of all sizes. Or you can, for example, draw several large circles and then start filling the gaps between them with the smaller circles. It's a very meditative and rewarding process. So now, as we can confidently draw nice straight lines, squares, triangles, and circles, let's step up the game a bit. I'm talking about the progressions of the primitives we've drawn before. Starting with the lines, what I'm basically doing is I'm drawing a line, making slight adjustments with each subsequent line. So now I not only have to watch the initial shape, but keep those progressive changes. Very often, especially during the ideation phase of our work, we search for shapes, and a common thing is we feel that the line isn't quite right, but we don't pull a completely different one. Instead, what we want is a line that's mostly the same but slightly altered in one way or another. And with these progressions, we calibrate our body for more control and precision. I'm going through the same procedure with the circles and all kinds of simple tubes. We shouldn't draw anything specific within this exercise, nor should we connect the primitives into complex compositions. We want to keep it simple. Same goes for the square progressions, cubes and rectangular prisms, and of course the triangles. As I have already mentioned, this type of exercise is meant to be made in volumes, but don't rush it. And don't expect an immediate response. Your body and senses need time to adapt to the new challenges. Alright, small recap of what we've done so far. We first created some lines, then squares, triangles, and circles. Then we've proceeded to the progressions and finally created some simple three-dimensional shapes. Moving on to the next step, and that is deconstruction and fusion. So I've gathered various items from all around the house that we'll be drawing, and here's how we'll approach it. Firstly, we'll break down these items into their fundamental primitives to see the essence of their shapes. And then we're gonna be fusing the primitives together to get the actual drawing. I could have taken some images from the internet as well, but to deal with the real objects we can hold and study in our hands is just so much more engaging. So I got a bulb, a thermometer, a tripod, a computer mouse, a game controller, and finally a DSLR camera. Let's begin with the bulb. It's quite straightforward. Essentially, it's composed of a sphere followed by a tapered tube and a couple of cylinders at the bottom. Now I will use this image as an underlay to create a drawing by slightly concaving the tapered tube, adding some extra lines to create something that resembles a thread, and softening some edges. We've drawn a bulb. Really basic, alright? The second item is the thermometer. This one is a bit more interesting. We can see that it's made out of two cylinders intersecting at an angle. I am dividing the big cylinder in half, rounding off its top and bottom. Next, I'm fusing it with the smaller cylinder, meaning I'm creating a curved surface between the two to melt them together. Finally, I'm adding some details and a rough shading to bring some life into the image. Here you can see all three steps. Two cylinders merge at the intersection with a blending surface followed by a simple shader. Next is the mouse. I'm not really following the exact design of it, but rather the general shape. My goal is not to depict the mouse exactly, but rather understand how I can come to the shape that resembles it. I'm even adding some elements to it that are not present in the actual item, like this triangular cutout, to explore the shape and how I can make it more three-dimensional, but this is completely optional. At this point, I don't care about functionality or its ergonomics. I'm not trying to become an industrial designer overnight. It's not the point. As long as we can understand how to recreate the shape of this mouse from the primitives, Our goal is accomplished. One more time how I came to this shape. I first draw a circle. Then I cut it in half and squashed it a little and adjusted the peak of my curve. And this alone already gave us the outline we need. We can add some details if we feel like, and we are good with this one. Next is the game controller. Its shape is notably more complex than that of a computer mouse, but the principles remain the same. On the top view, it's a collection of rectangles and circles, but it's important to keep in mind that these are actually tubes. So now I took this deconstructed version of my controller as an underlay, and I'm going over it, fusing the parts together, creating blending surfaces between them, adding tension to the lines and rounding off corners. Once I have established the overall shape, I'm going into some details that are the same primitives as well, manipulated in one way or another, just the same rectangles and circles. Here I'm giving them some shaders to introduce three-dimensionality to the object. This is not our goal just for now, but I'll go ahead and render this image further to give you a clear visual representation of this evolution of going from the primitives to a finished piece. Same as with the computer mouse, I'm not trying to achieve 100% accurate proportions or learn much about the game control itself. Just a meaningful resemblance is enough for now. Point is, if you try to check all the boxes at the same time as a beginner, you might feel overwhelmed and lose motivation. Don't do that. Take one step at a time and let your knowledge and experience grow in harmony, so to speak. Generally, we can look at it this way. So we have theoretical knowledge on the left and practical experience on the right. Gaining practical experience with limited knowledge can lead to rapid initial progress, which is a good thing. But very soon we'll hit a plateau. On the other hand, when we gain knowledge while leaving practical experience behind by, for example, reading extensively about drawing or watching endless video tutorials and so on, we eventually will realize things aren't as straightforward, that drawing needs way more time and commitment, and everything is much more complex than we originally thought. And having so much knowledge without having any experience creates this gap that might lead us to anxiety, preventing us from even attempting to begin drawing. Oddly enough, sometimes it's easier to start something when we know almost nothing. So to keep things balanced, we should gain both, but with knowledge going slightly ahead of experience. Back to our game controller. I've made a perspective drawing of it as well, using the same method you're already familiar with. Let's quickly review the other items on the list. The tripod is almost completely composed of squares and cylinders. Not even much fusion is needed here. Very easy and satisfying to draw. And applying some simple shaders, we can achieve some decent results. The camera is a much more intricate object, especially being drawn in perspective, but as you can see, I've simplified it quite a bit. If we struggle with whatever item we are working with during this exercise, it's perfectly fine to get rid of some details and simplify it to the point where we feel comfortable drawing it. And with this, we've covered the deconstruction and fusion part. Let's take a look at what we've accomplished with this step. This is a very universal and accessible way to learn how to draw things, and in general, a useful habit to explore how shape and function go together and influence each other. The third step is tracing and extracting. And before it gets controversial, we have to understand the purpose and limitations of this concept. Tracing is not a method to learn how to draw. It doesn't teach us how to create lines, shapes, or compositions. We trace things in order to study them, to go by the steps of the original artist or designer, incorporating their experience into our own, not by the means of stealing, but to make their work a part of our neural database that needs an input first before we can generate something new. This principle obviously applies not only to cars. At a certain point of immersion into the matter, there is almost no such thing as simple object. Everything needs to be studied. Just go ahead and trace a car you think you know well, and most certainly you will discover so much more about it. You'll see it with new eyes and with a deeper understanding of what makes that car great. And with this information, you then go back to drawing again to convert your new knowledge into practical experience through your own designs. So use tracing to your advantage as a tool to learn more about the subject of your interest, but don't become enslaved by it. Drawing and tracing are completely different experiences, albeit they might look very similar at first glance. By drawing, we create information. By tracing, we extract information that otherwise would stay unnoticed. And one process is not a substitute for the other. Let me visualize what I'm talking about. You see, ideation, execution, and editing are three completely different neurological functions, and all three need attention. Editing, meaning putting ideas through critical thinking, is essential to the creative process. And to be creative, we have to think outside the box. This is what we are constantly told, and it's absolutely true, but we sometimes completely forget to look inside that box first to know what's already been done, to get the knowledge from there. And believe me, there is so much wild stuff in that box. So tracing existing products and paying attention to the things that otherwise would stay unnoticed helps us to better comprehend the past, the present, and to see what the future could hold for us. It additionally encourages us to question why something has been designed or painted in a particular way and not the other. But isn't just looking at the objects not enough? Well, why should we limit ourselves by not using all the senses available to us? The same data processed by the eyes and hands are not copies of each other, but double as rich. It goes much deeper as well, becoming part of us, helping us create, edit, and execute our own ideas in a more effective and, I would say, deliberate way. The simple logic behind all we are doing today is that we first learn how to play individual notes. Then we play a chord. After this, we play something from other artists, just to get that taste of what music is all about. And then we play our own pieces. So go ahead and trace some nice cars or anything for that matter. Study their shapes and curves. I mean, you don't have to religiously go after all the smallest details to the point where you start seeing that a Ford Focus and a Lamborghini Murcielago share the same turn signals.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Tracing the main lines and volumes is enough to get an idea of what the object is all about. And, as it's always the case, these steps are not a rigid structure to stick to. Nor are they the only exercises you'll ever need or something. Of course not. This is just the beginning. Feel free to do whatever you feel like. You won't go in jail for trying to sketch something before you are capable of drawing 500 perfect circles in one try, blindfolded, while going through turbulent flows in the plane that flies upside down. Moreover, I really hope you sketch whatever and however you want to sketch. It's a creative process after all. My suggested steps are not a path to blindly follow, but rather a compass direction that's always there should you feel lost on your journey. Alright, let's go real quick through all three steps again. Step number 1, we were drawing some primitives and their progressions to improve our fine motor skills and gain muscle memory. Step number 2, we were deconstructing some items into the primitive shapes to understand the fundamental blocks they are built from. And then we were fusing them together to get the actual drawings. And during the third step, we were tracing some objects of our interest, in our case cars, to study their shapes and what makes them great, to use that knowledge to build upon. Alright, I hope I could share some useful information with you all. Enjoy drawing and have a great time.